The Serenity Encounter. Chapter 1. The Town of Serenity. It was the summer of '92 in a small rural town called Serenity. Serenity was an unspectacular town, and it was an unspectacular day by all accounts. The day started the way it always had, as it was supposed to, and as it did since the founding of the town. Predictable as clockwork, but none of its mechanical complexity. On the contrary, Serenity was simplicity itself. On this fateful day, everyone was doing their own thing. Everyone were going about their day, mostly focused on their business. Dr. Gallo tended to his patients, who mostly suffered from minor ailments, the sore throats, the scraped knees, colds and fevers, and the regular hypochondriac. And of course his week would not be complete without reluctantly stepping in as the town's unofficial vet, for the occasional pet. On the other end of the same street, Mitra, the sole waitress of the local diner, Valjean's, is hustling for tips. A young blonde in her 20s, she is often described as good at her job as far as taking orders and serving food, but her personality can sometimes leave some customers with a bad taste in their mouths. She was said to have a mean streak and a sarcastic tongue that at times offends some, while others find the same trait charming. Although her personality is in question, it is unanimous that everyone considers her to be a looker. Mayor Gilbert followed his usual route in surveying the town, walking in such a way that it may appear to a passerby that he may as well be the owner of the town, or perhaps simply its official mascot, depending on who you ask. Whether the master or the mascot, everyone seemed to love him nevertheless. He has been mayor since much of the inhabitants of the town were born, and he never lost an election, but only because no one else felt compelled to run against him. In fact, he has been known to be mayor for life, an unofficial title his constituents affectionately gave him. The rest of the townsfolk were busy with their business. The shopkeepers counted change, the butcher chopped meat, and the baker kneaded dough. All the cogs were in place except for the children, because children belong in school and it was summer, and during the summer school was not in session. 3 high school seniors, the inseparable trio of Paula, Albert and Stephen, decided to go to the edge of the town at the boundary of the woods to find relief from the boredom that all summers of the '90s, without exception, were afflicted with. The 3 often go to this part of the woods to escape the mundanity of the simple life. Chapter 2. The Crash. In the utmost unexpected way, the unmovable solemnity of the town was shattered, perhaps never to be repaired. Around midday, as both hands of the big old church clock pointed to the heavens, something fell from the sky, towards deep into the nearby woods. The crash could be seen from almost anywhere in town, and the impact was heard by all, a thunder that shook the clouds and also the ground. For most, there was no expected response to such an unexpected disturbance. Therefore the initial reaction was rarely due to panic, nor instinct, but by shock and an uncertainty on how to react. This uncertainty caused a myriad of unexpected reactions, at least initially. Each of the townsfolk reacted differently. Most were curious, others cautious. The waitress Mitra did not see the crash herself, but heard it as she was serving some hot dogs to a regular. At the moment of impact, her instinct was to go under one of the diner's tables and to remain there as long as she felt it was safe, while her customers ran outside to see the emerging smoke coming up from the crash. Dr. Gallo almost blotched a circumcision because the most crucial part of the procedure coincided with the loud atmospheric boom. And at the middle of the town there, unfazed, as if nothing happened, was old Mayor Gilbert. He was a picture of grizzled calm, a tower of stoicism, albeit bent and crooked, an image of an experienced leader that has seen it all. Some of the townsfolk began to notice their mayor's calm and admiration. They wondered how could such an old man, who often appeared confused, whose memory was failing, who was highly regarded not for any of recent notable accomplishments, there were none, but for his achievements of days long gone, could still go about his day as if nothing happened. The townsfolk were assured that he was indeed the right man to lead Serenity in these strange days. Indeed, his was an image of a man not only chosen by the people, but also favored by a higher power. But the truth is far from the romanticized assumptions. The mayor, being an old man, removed his hearing aid that morning and misplaced it by putting it in the right pocket instead of the left. By the time he remembered where he misplaced it, the explosion had already occurred and he did not hear a thing. When he finally figured out that something unusual was happening, he, through the sheriff and his deputy, immediately called for an emergency meeting to be held at the town hall. Chapter 3. The Hall of Shame. The agenda was the crash in the woods. It was an open forum where the citizens voiced out their concerns, relived their experiences of the event which happened just a few hours ago, and gave suggestions on what to do next. But mostly they concocted theories and consumed snacks. Pastor Bob claimed that it could be a vessel of the Nephilim that somehow had managed to escape the biblical flood and return to Earth. Dr. Gallo suggested that it could have been a weather balloon. Mitra, the waitress, insisted that it was an alien spaceship, and that she didn't want to have anything to do with it. Even the deputy threw in his 2 cents by elaborating how it may be an experimental military aircraft, as he drew rough but extremely detailed sketches, and wrote extremely complicated formulas on the whiteboard to support his theory in such a way that one may suspect that he has done this presentation before. There were other theories, of course. Some were ridiculous, some funny, some closer to the truth. But in the end of the day, no one knew for sure. After a short break of coffee and cupcakes, the committee commenced with the meeting, but continued consuming cupcakes. The general consensus was that to know for sure, there must be a party to investigate the crash site. Someone proposed a team to be formed to investigate the crash site and to report back. But, in contrast to the earlier agenda where everyone wanted to give a piece of their mind, no one wanted to actually volunteer to be part of the investigation team. Even the sheriff and his deputy had an excuse to stay within the town, claiming that the safety of the many, referring to the townsfolk, outweighs the safety of the few, referring to the members of the hypothetical investigation team to be sent into the wilderness. A good excuse to remain, but a brilliant justification to decline. The committee threw the investigation idea out for now and brainstormed on what else to brainstorm about. Chapter 4: The Trio in the Woods. Meanwhile, the 3 teenagers had been the nearest to the crash. They had already been within the fringes of the woods all day when the crash happened, and they heard the explosion louder than anyone. They saw the lights brighter than anyone. But even from where they were, the crash itself was still a safe kilometer or 2 removed from them. It had been some time since the impact happened, but Paula was still complaining that her ears still buzzed because of the explosion. Albert playfully pretended he could not hear any of her complaints to amuse himself. And to irritate the girl, Stephen laughed at the juvenile banner, getting the most enjoyment out of the situational comedy unfolding before his eyes. Despite this, the 3 were aware that something special happened deep into the woods, and they would be damned if they let the opportunity for an adventure pass. The teens' decision was more decisive than the adults back in town. They decided to travel by foot and check out the crash site. Paula, Albert, and Stephen knew the woods well. They knew the terrain well. Every stream, every rock, every slope, and every significant tree almost as much as they knew each other's likes, dislikes, quirks, pet peeves, and secrets. In a way, the woods was the 4th member of their gang. Just a few hundred yards past the old hunter's cabin, there it was, a silver saucer as big as a city bus, partly buried, badly damaged, and objectively beautiful. The 3 cautiously approached to investigate. Albert gripped tight a stick in his left hand and a rock in his right. Paula reached for a pocket knife, and Stephen, for the first time in his life, was afraid. Chapter 5: The Search Party. Back in the town hall, the meeting was still going nowhere. The sense of urgency that opened up the forum with the formulation of crazy theories, drafting of wild proposals, and proposals of preposterous plans has degraded into a grand tea party of silly small talk, irrelevant complaints, and petty gossip. Sans the tea, Mayor Gilbert, who at least officially presided over the meeting, had an attack of the occasional lapse of memory. For a moment he thought the topic was still about creating an investigation team instead of whose bake shop served the pastry that aliens would prefer most. He went to the microphone and interrupted all ongoing discussions to ask if there were people already near the crash site. They would be perfect to be part of the investigation team because they would already be there. Dr. Gallo respectfully pointed out that if there were indeed people near the crash, they would not know that they would be part of the investigation team anyway because they would have been there all along and not in this meeting. Then, in a rare moment of lucidity, the mayor's expression turned from confused to deeply worried. He explained, with a passing amount of eloquence and a great amount of urgency, that it has been summer all summer long, and it was summer still, which means some of the kids may be in the woods, because everyone knows that during summer in this town the kids always go to the woods. Everyone knew this was the truth because everyone in that town hall was at one point in their lives a kid in this town. Almost every parent in the town hall was sure that their kids were safe. Those who were unsure went home to check. All the children had been accounted for except for 3, Paula, Albert, and Stephen. Everyone in town knew that the trio often go to the woods, and they might still be there. Upon this realization, a certain seriousness overtook the town hall, a seriousness that was not present up until now, because now, lives were at stake. After some discussion, because now lives were at stake, it was decided that a search party must be organized. In a stunning contrast from early on in the meeting, almost every physically capable person volunteered to go. even the sheriff and his reluctant deputy. The waitress Mitra did not volunteer, however. She was outspoken and was strongly against going. She did not want to risk her life for a bunch of kids, nor for anyone's sake. She decided to stay as most of the townsfolk headed to the woods, racing against the setting of the sun. The few who were left behind went about their day, albeit on their guard, as they waited with hearts filled with anticipation. Chapter 6: Unidentified Fallen Object. Everybody in the search party at one time in their younger years knew the woods. For generations, the terrain, the landmarks, and even some of the trails had been largely unchanged. For a search party whose members spanned several generations, this was a welcome advantage. After some time, the party reached the crash site. They found the teenagers beside the UFO alive and doing well, if a bit exhausted. They were never in real danger, and the search party was relieved that this was the case. The trio had already managed to pry open the craft when the party arrived. The UFO door lay detached and on the ground like a vanquished guard, but it was clear that there was no alien inside the ship itself. Inside was an empty cockpit full of wires. As word went around, everyone in the woods converged into the scene, awestruck by the craft and at the same time relieved that the kids were safe. Everyone could have gone home knowing the kids were safe, but since they were here anyway, they all wanted to see for themselves the craft that has caused all the commotion. Some were scared, some excited, some unsure of its authenticity. Someone asked the trio how they managed to open the UFO door. Stephen explained how simple science was used to break into what seemed to be the most advanced piece of technology in the world at the moment. They used the pocket knife as a wedge, and the stick and rock as a lever to pry open the UFO's hatch. It took a while, but apparently the aliens, even with their enviable technology, were not too worried about keeping thieves out of their ships. With the very same tools, Stephen demonstrated on the spot how they broke into the spacecraft. Chapter 7: First in Line. The time for darkness has come once again to the town of Serenity. From the diner window, the waitress Mitra looks into the direction of the crash, anticipating the arrival of the party, perhaps with the kids, she hoped. Despite knowing the woods well, and also being a child of Serenity, she still opted to stay behind. While it was the sense of self-preservation that comes with the fear of the unknown, was the real reason why she decided to stay. Her mind constructed the justification that nothing bad would happen to the kids in the woods except from a direct hit. And if they were directly hit, an immediate search party would do no good. Seeing that everyone was still away, including her staff, she turned off the diner's neon lights with the assumption that there would be no more business for the remainder of the day. As she closed up shop, she pondered about the folks in the woods, then about the events of the day, the crash, the town hall meeting, the missing kids. Then she thought about her life, and how she always thought that she was too good for this town. In a not-so-past life she was the prom queen. She graduated with honors, and the yearbook promised she would be the most likely to succeed. Yet she ended up behind a counter anyway. All these years she still could not grasp what might have went wrong. She did everything right. She was pretty, smart, and charismatic. She excelled in everything she did. Yet somehow a jealous fate stationed her in the lowest places, at least in her mind, as a waitress condemned to serve the every whim of anyone who enters that door and opens a pocketbook. Then the diner door opened. She looked towards the door expecting to see a customer or at least someone she knows, but she saw something that frightened her to her very core. It was a small humanoid figure with the head of what looked like a praying mantis. She tried to hide behind the counter, but the creature was fast. It tried to subdue her, and she fought with all her might to keep it off her. She discovered that the creature was not too strong, and even as a woman she was able to somehow defend from its violent assault. There was a sliver of hope that she would get out of this situation alive, until the creature turned into mist and took over her body. She remained lifeless for a short time, and when she awoke her mind had already been possessed by this entity, and the Mitra that was no more. Chapter 8: Nothing to see here. It was already dark. Exhaustion and fatigue had caused the excitement of the event to fade by orders of magnitude. For the safety of everyone, the sheriff decided that it was time for everyone to go home. As the authority figure, the sheriff decided it was best to leave the UFO alone for now. He reasoned that if the alien wanted to get its property back in the future, then it will be where it left it. And if the alien decided that it has no use for it anymore, then there is no harm having a potential tourist attraction for the town in the long term. In any case, the last thing anyone wanted was trouble, least of all in the form of hostilities from a member of a more advanced race. Chapter 9: Something is going on around town. A day, maybe two, passed. How quickly everything was almost back to normal. No one noticed that Mitra the waitress was actually now an alien host, at least initially. she seemed to have lost a lot of her abrasive personality. Despite still having her perfect memory, she was no longer sarcastic, became too friendly, and no longer showed signs of excessive ambition and selfishness. Most townsfolk thought this was a welcome improvement. All her self-help cassette tapes must have worked for her in the end. One customer even thought. Everyone who noticed this change in her thought that this change was a good thing, except for the 3 teenagers who were convinced something sinister may have happened to her. Unknown to the townsfolk, she began to serve food that were infected with alien seeds, and those that consumed this contaminated food would eventually become hosts as well. When the seeds matured in the new host, the victim themselves would also become perpetrators who would also try to infect others in the same way. Among the first to be infected were the baker, then the butcher, then the grocer. Each of them also infected a significant number. Eventually all but the teens, who were noticing something strange about the townsfolk, were infected. The trio have been keeping an eye on Mitra, and they were convinced that she was somehow someone else. But they also began to notice this behavior happen to the others, because they were attentive to her movements. They noticed that the diner's regulars were the first ones to exhibit a similar change in behavior. They rightfully deduced that it was from food, or perhaps from the water, that this behavior-modifying epidemic spreads. Since then they had been careful to consume anything from anyone that exhibited the slightest suspicious behavior. But caution can only do so much. The infection spread rapidly, and there was no longer anywhere safe in town. They even noticed the same eerie changes within their families, their homes. With nowhere to go and with great sadness, the 3 decided to depart from their homes and went into hiding. Ironically, the only place in the entire town deemed safest was the old hunter's cabin not far from the crash site. Chapter 10. Get the hell out of Serenity. For 2 weeks they stayed hidden from the infected townsfolk at the hunter's cabin, surviving only on the supplies they brought with them, the canned foods and dried meat they acquired from the store or took from their pantries. And when the food ran out, they fished and gathered berries and fruits. They dare not go near town to resupply, at least early on. They know that the town would soon be completely infected, if it had not been already. The 3 decided to leave the woods of Serenity. Leave the town, but to do that they need to steal a vehicle. Albert suggested that they should commandeer the UFO since it's already nearby. They already had the doors open and it appeared to be abandoned, ripe for the taking. But Paula pointed out the flaws of this plan. First, that the ship can only accommodate one of them, and it would be cramped because the entire ship was made for a smaller race. Second, none of them knew how to hotwire a UFO. Third, and most important, is that none of them actually knew how to fly an alien aircraft. Steven suggested they could steal the doctor's flatbed pickup truck instead. All of them knew how to drive, and Steven is pretty handy with electronics and automobiles. So to speak, he knows how to hotwire an automobile. The truck served as the clinic's ambulance, used mostly as a service vehicle for house calls and emergencies. It is often left unlocked for practical purposes, and since the town had been a peaceful town, and the doctor a prominent and respected figure, no one had ever messed with the truck. For the teens, this was the most viable vehicle to hijack. As the midnight hour approached, Paula, Albert, and Steven prepared themselves for the auto theft. Cautiously, they made their way towards the clinic where the doctor's truck was parked. As expected, it stood there unlocked and waiting for them. The 3 of them breathed a sigh of relief as they climbed into the vehicle to now try to hotwire the truck. But they were not alone. Mitra, the waitress, had been watching in the shadows all along. She screamed a supersonic shriek that was a call for all the infected into action. Then she ran, with an almost superhuman speed, towards the truck. Albert saw the waitress coming towards them and urged Steven to work faster. Paula made sure all the doors were locked, as Steven worked on hot-wiring the vehicle under intense pressure. The waitress was suddenly on the hood, still in her uniform with clenched fists. She pounded on the truck's windshield with the fury from the depths of hell, trying to break the glass. Finally the truck started, but more villagers were closing in. Steven drove off while the waitress was still on the hood. The villagers were approaching from all directions. Steven drove as fast as he could and made a sharp turn at the end of the block, dislodging the waitress from the hood. But the infected were now everywhere. Many were in the middle of the streets to impede their escape. But the trio knew what will happen if they hesitated, and Paula urged Steven to ram all that stood in the way, convincing him that they were no longer human but demonic entities out for their souls. Steven ran over a few of them like physics going through dominoes. He may even have flattened a townsfolk or two, perhaps even the mayor. No one could be sure with all the chaos, panic and screaming from inside and outside the truck going on and all at once. It was a bloody rampage. Yet the infected kept coming in with inhuman speeds, continued to chase after the escaping flatbed truck that was struggling to accelerate despite the pedal was on the metal. At a certain point, the truck eventually picked up a speed that was impossible for the inhabitants to match, even with superhuman abilities. The last of the town they saw was the old billboard that says you are leaving the town of Serenity, and a deranged horde in the rearview mirror vanishing in the fog. Chapter 11. The End. As they drove farther from town, they couldn't help but look back. They knew they would never see their homes or loved ones again, but they also understood that staying behind meant certain death. Their hearts ached for what they had lost. Yet hope flickered within them as they embarked on a new and uncertain journey. As the first light of dawn began to appear in the sky, Paula, Albert, and Stephen knew that their lives are forever changed. They hoped that the infection would somehow be contained in the town of Serenity, never to spread. There is always reason to hope, but in the end, they do not know for sure. They do not even know where they are heading, nor what will happen to them. They do not know what will become of the town, the country, or the world. All they know is that they are leaving, and they are heading as far as they possibly can.
Final report for Serenity Anomaly. Craft is defunctioned, no pilot structure recovered, no infestation patterns remain, community status compliant. The trio of subjects are no longer present. Behavioral integration exceeds forecast. Denial vector confirmed. Municipal gas event. Closure achieved. We continue. End transmission.